I never thought I'd have to go to court over a mailbox, but when an HOA Karen decided my custom-built family heirloom mailbox would be better for community use, my quiet suburban life turned into a battle I never asked for. This is the story of how I fought back against HOA overreach, made some unlikely allies, and learned that sometimes the smallest things are worth fighting for. The morning sun cast long shadows across my front yard as I stood admiring my grandfather's handiwork. The copper and brass mailbox had been a fixture of Cedar Street since before Maple Grove Estates was even a concept on some developer's drawing. A board. My grandfather, a master metalworker, had crafted it by hand in 1962, and it had passed down through our family, along with the colonial-style house that had been my home for the past 15 years. I'm Tom Anderson, and until 6 months ago, my life in Maple Grove Estates was remarkably unremarkable. My mornings usually started with coffee on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake up while admiring how the rising sun would catch the intricate patterns my grandfather had etched into that mailbox. It wasn't just a mailbox to me. It was a piece of family history, a daily reminder of craftsmanship you rarely see anymore. Amy Parker, our postal worker, often commented on how it was her favorite stop on the route. "They don't make them like this anymore, Tom," she'd say, running her fingers over the weathered but well-maintained metalwork. "This box makes my job feel special." I'd beam with pride every time she said it, sharing another detail about how my grandfather had spent months perfecting each decorative scroll and curve. The house itself was modest by Maple Grove standards, but what it lacked in square footage, it made up for in character. My grandfather had bought the property back when Cedar Street was just a dirt road, and the maple trees that gave our neighborhood its name were still saplings. He'd chosen this spot specifically for its view of the sunrise and positioned the mailbox just so, ensuring it would catch the morning light perfectly. I'd grown up visiting this house, spending summers helping my grandfather in his workshop, watching him restore antique metalwork and create new pieces. When he passed away 5 years ago, leaving me both the house and his beloved mailbox, I promised myself I'd honor his legacy by maintaining everything exactly as he would have wanted. The neighborhood had changed dramatically since those early days. What was once a collection of unique, individually owned homes had slowly transformed into an HOA-governed community. When the Oakwood Community Association formed 3 years ago, I'd reluctantly signed on, assured by the initial board that they would respect the historical character of the original properties. "We just want to maintain property values and keep things tidy," they'd said. "Nothing dramatic will change." For the first couple of years, that seemed true. The HOA focused on reasonable things, maintaining the community park, organizing neighborhood events, ensuring trash bins weren't left out too long. I paid my dues, attended the occasional meeting, and generally kept to myself. My grandfather's mailbox, while distinctly different from the newer standardized ones that had sprung up around it, had never been an issue. That all changed when Karen Mitchell was elected HOA board president. I first met Karen at a community barbecue last summer. She'd recently moved into one of the newer McMansions at the end of Cedar Street, and within months had positioned herself as the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of property values. She'd approached me that day, plastic wine glass in hand, wearing the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Tom," she'd said, gesturing toward my house with her glass, "I've been meaning to talk to you about your unique mailbox situation." I'd smiled, ready to share its history, but she'd continued before I could speak. "While we appreciate vintage items, the board is working on creating a more cohesive community aesthetic. We're thinking of implementing standardized mailboxes throughout Maple Grove, something more modern." I'd politely explained the mailbox's significance, its craftsmanship, its history. Karen had nodded along, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Her eyes had that glazed look people get when they're already convinced they're right. "That's a lovely story," she'd said, patting my arm condescendingly. "But times change. Progress is inevitable. Think about the community." I'd walked away from that conversation with an uneasy feeling in my gut. Something in her tone, the way she'd dismissed decades of family history as merely a lovely story, warned me that this wouldn't be the end of it. I was right. The following weeks brought subtle changes to the neighborhood. New community guidelines started appearing in our monthly newsletter. Seemingly innocent suggestions about unified street aesthetics and modern community standards began cropping up at HOA meetings. I noticed Karen photographing my mailbox. One morning, typing something into her phone with fierce concentration. My neighbor, Robert Wilson, who'd lived on Cedar Street almost as long as my grandfather, started warning me about conversations he'd overheard at the community center. "They're planning something, Tom," he'd said one evening, his weathered face creased with concern. "That Karen, she's got it in her head that everything needs to match, like we're living in some kind of display village. Don't let them bully you." I appreciated Robert's warning, but part of me still couldn't believe anyone would make a serious issue out of a mailbox. It was well maintained, functionally perfect, and if anything, added character to the street. Surely there were more important things for the HOA to worry about? The first real sign that something was wrong came on a crisp October morning. I was heading out to grab the newspaper when I noticed a bright orange sticker plastered across my grandfather's mailbox. "Notice of non-compliance," it screamed in bold letters, the adhesive already eating into the carefully maintained patina of the copper surface. My hands shook as I peeled it off, trying not to damage the metal underneath. The sticker left behind a sticky residue that would take hours to remove properly. Beneath it was a typed notice detailing alleged violations of community standards I'd never heard of before. Amy Parker, our postal worker, pulled up in her truck just as I was photographing the damage. She jumped out, clutching a handful of mail and wearing a concerned expression. "Tom, I was going to call you after my route," she said, glancing around nervously. "Yesterday, that HOA president, Mrs. Mitchell, stopped me. Started asking all sorts of questions about your mailbox, whether it met postal regulations, if I'd ever had problems delivering mail, if I'd received any complaints. I told her it's one of the best designed boxes on my route, but she just kept taking notes and smirking. I thanked Amy for the warning, but my stomach was already churning. Taking my mail inside, I spread the violation notice on my kitchen table and read it carefully. The document cited Section 7(3) of the HOA bylaws regarding streetscape uniformity and approved mailbox designs. But when I pulled up the original HOA agreement I'd signed 3 years ago, Section 7(3) said nothing about mailboxes. They'd changed the rules without notification. That afternoon, I spotted Karen Mitchell power walking through the neighborhood with Jennifer Brooks, the HOA secretary, both of them clutching tablets and gesturing at various houses. They paused in front of mine for several minutes, pointing and talking in low voices. When they noticed me watching through the window, Karen gave a tight-lipped smile and waved, as if we were all good friends and there was nothing strange about their behavior. Later that day, Linda Peterson from across the street came over with a plate of cookies and a warning. "They were at the coffee shop this morning," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if Karen might materialize behind her. "I overheard them, talking about phase 1 of neighborhood beautification. They're targeting anything they consider non-standard. Your mailbox was specifically mentioned." I appreciated Linda's heads up, but part of me still couldn't believe this was really happening. It seemed absurd that anyone would invest so much energy into forcing someone to change a mailbox that had stood proudly for over 60 years. The next morning, I found 3 separate real estate business cards tucked into my front door. Each had a handwritten note suggesting I consider the future value of my property. When I checked my mail, There was a glossy brochure for approved community mailbox designs, all sleek, modern and completely soulless metal boxes that looked like they belonged in front of a corporate office park rather than a family home. Robert Wilson caught me as I was examining the brochure. He'd been working in his front garden, but I could tell he'd been watching the situation unfold. "They did the same thing to the Johnsons last year," he said, leaning on his garden rake. "Remember their beautiful stone fountain? Been there since the 70s. They kept getting citations until they replaced it with one of those awful modern things from the approved catalog." I spent that evening diving deep into HOA documents, trying to understand exactly what rights they had and what rights I retained as a homeowner. The more I read, the more confused and concerned I became.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The original bylaws I'd agreed to were straightforward, focused on maintaining basic standards of upkeep and preventing genuine eyesores. But in the past year, under Karen's leadership, they'd added amendment after amendment, each one more restrictive than the last. The next few days brought a steady stream of subtle pressure. Every morning, I'd find new real estate cards, more brochures, and increasingly strongly worded suggestions about community standards. Karen and Jennifer made a point of walking past my house multiple times a day, always stopping to take pictures and make notes. Other neighbors started reaching out, some with sympathy, others with concern. Dave Peterson, Linda's husband, pulled me aside after work one evening. "They're talking about your case at board meetings," he warned. "Karen's making it sound like you're some kind of rebel threatening property values. She's building support for something big." The tension reached a new level when I found Karen's daughter and two other teenagers taking selfies in front of my mailbox, dramatically pointing at it and laughing. When I stepped outside, they quickly scattered, but not before I heard one of them say, "Mom says it's going to be gone soon anyway." That weekend, I noticed increased activity in the neighborhood. Board members seemed to be going door to door, clipboards in hand. Through my front window, I could see animated conversations taking place on porches up and down Cedar Street. Several neighbors who usually waved as they passed by suddenly became very interested in their phones when they walked past my house. The following Monday, I received an official-looking envelope in my now controversial mailbox. Inside was a formal notice from the Oakwood Community Association, signed by Karen Mitchell as board president. The letter detailed a list of community complaints about my mailbox, citing everything from non-conforming design elements to potential safety hazards, though it failed to specify what those hazards might be. The letter concluded with an ultimatum. I had 30 days to replace my grandfather's handcrafted masterpiece with an approved model from their catalog, or I would face daily fines of $50. What's more, they claimed the right to take corrective action if I failed to comply, whatever that meant. I stood in my driveway, letter crumpled in my hand, staring at the mailbox that had been part of my family's history for over 6 decades. The morning sun caught its surface just right, highlighting the intricate patterns my grandfather had so lovingly created. Each curve and scroll told a story, carried a memory. That's when I knew this wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about standing up to bullies who mistook power for right, who valued conformity over character. It was about protecting not just my property, but the very idea that neighborhoods could have personality, that homes could tell stories. As I stared at the HOA's official letter demanding the removal of my grandfather's mailbox, I knew I needed to address this head-on. The next morning, I walked into the Oakwood Community Association's office, housed in what used to be a charming craftsman house at the entrance to our neighborhood. The building had recently been painted in what Karen called modern neutrals, various shades of gray that made it look more like a corporate satellite office than a community center. Jennifer Brooks, the HOA secretary, looked up from her computer with visible discomfort as I approached her desk. "Oh, Mr. Anderson," she said, shuffling some papers unnecessarily. "Do you have an appointment?" "I need to speak with Karen Mitchell," I said, placing the violation letter on her desk. "It's about this." "Mrs. Mitchell is very busy with community matters," Jennifer replied, not meeting my eyes. "But I can schedule you for next week's open forum." "This can't wait until next week," I insisted, keeping my voice calm but firm. "I'll wait." Jennifer glanced nervously at the closed door behind her, then picked up her phone. After a whispered conversation, she gestured for me to take a seat. 20 minutes later, Karen emerged from her office, dressed as if she were heading to a corporate board meeting rather than managing a suburban HOA. "Tom," she said, with that same plastic smile I'd come to know, "I assume this is about the community aesthetic improvement notice?" I followed her into her office, noting how she decorated it with framed photos of other exemplary HOA communities, all featuring identical houses, identical landscaping, and yes, identical mailboxes. "Karen," I began, "my mailbox has been part of this street for 60 years. It's well-maintained, functional, and has historical significance. It was here long before Maple Grove Estates even existed." She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands on her desk. "Tom, I understand you have a sentimental attachment to your unique installation, but times change. Progress is inevitable. We're trying to create a cohesive community aesthetic that will protect everyone's property values." "Show me where, in the original HOA agreement, it says anything about standardized mailboxes," I challenged. Karen's smile tightened slightly. "The board has the authority to update community standards as needed. The new guidelines were properly posted in the community center and emailed to all residents." "Posted where exactly? And I never received any email about this." She pulled out a tablet, tapping through several screens. "It was included in our monthly newsletter under proposed changes. All residents had the opportunity to voice concerns during the standard review period." I leaned forward. "A review period nobody knew about. And now you're threatening daily fines and corrective action? What does that even mean?" "It means, Mr. Anderson," she said, dropping all pretense of friendliness, "that as a member of this community, you have obligations. The board has the authority to enforce community standards, including the removal of non-compliant fixtures." "Are you threatening to remove my property without my consent?" Karen's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm simply explaining the board's rights under the HOA agreement. Now, if you'd like to file a formal appeal, there's a process for that. Jennifer can provide you with the necessary forms. They just need to be submitted in triplicate with all supporting documentation within 5 business days." As I left her office, I heard her on the phone. "Yes, he was just here. No, completely unreasonable. We may need to escalate this." That evening, I found another notice taped to my door. This one detailed the formal appeal process, a Byzantine maze of paperwork, documentation requirements, and committee reviews that would make a tax auditor's head spin. Each step had its own filing fee, and the entire process could take up to 6 months to complete. Meanwhile, the daily fines would continue to accumulate. I was reading through the appeal requirements when there was a knock at my door. It was Steve Cooper, a member of the city council who lived a few blocks away. I'd voted for him in the last election, but had never spoken to him personally. "Tom," he said, looking uncomfortable, "I heard about the situation with your mailbox. Look, I know it's not fair, but Karen Mitchell has a lot of influence in the community. Her husband plays golf with half the council, and she's been pushing for stricter property regulations across the entire district." "So you're saying I should just give in?" I asked, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. Steve shifted his weight. I'm saying choose your battles carefully. The HOA has deep pockets and a legal team on retainer. They can make things very difficult for you. After he left, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My grandfather's mailbox cast a long shadow across the lawn, its familiar silhouette, a reminder of everything that made this neighborhood special before the drive for uniformity took over. The next morning, I found my driveway blocked by a large white van. Two men in uniforms were measuring my mailbox and taking photographs. When I asked what they were doing, they claimed to be from Community Compliance Services and showed me badges that looked official but provided no real information. Just a routine inspection, one of them said, making notes on a tablet. Nothing to worry about. But later that day, Amy Parker stopped by after her route. Tom, those men weren't from the Postal Service, she said. I checked with my supervisor. We haven't authorized any inspections in this area. That evening, I received an email from the HOA with a quote for the approved replacement mailbox, $890 plus installation fees, permits, and a mandatory aesthetic compliance review. The total came to nearly $2,500, not including the accumulated fines for my existing violation. I was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about control, about erasing the character and history of our neighborhood one small change at a time. Karen and her board were counting on residents giving in, choosing the path of least resistance over standing up for what made our community unique. Karen Mitchell made her first major power play on a Tuesday morning. I was just finishing my coffee when I heard the distinct sound of a truck backing up outside. Looking through my window, I saw a white van with Community Standards Enforcement emblazoned on its side, parking directly in front of my house. Karen emerged from her SUV, moments later, tablet in hand, wearing what could only be described as a victory smile. "Good morning, Mr. Anderson," she called out with artificial cheerfulness as I stepped onto my porch. "We're here to discuss the final resolution of our mailbox situation." Behind her stood Mark Thompson, the HOA's attorney, and two burly men in uniforms I'd never seen before. Thompson stepped forward, extending a handful of documents. "These are the final notices regarding your non-compliant fixture," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "As per Section 7.3 of the updated bylaws, the board has authorized immediate corrective action. I took the papers but stood my ground. This is private property. You have no right to remove anything without my consent." Karen's smile widened. "Actually, Mr. Anderson, under the newly ratified community guidelines, we do. The board voted last night to declare your mailbox a community aesthetic hazard. We're here to facilitate its removal and replacement with an approved model." One of the uniformed men started moving toward my mailbox, but I stepped between them. "Touch that mailbox, and I'll call the police." "That won't be necessary," a familiar voice called out. Amy Parker, our postal worker, was walking briskly up the street, her phone in hand. "I've already contacted my supervisor at the post office. This mailbox is registered as a historic fixture under federal postal regulations." Karen's smile faltered slightly. "This is a community matter, Miss Parker. The Postal Service has no jurisdiction over HOA aesthetic standards." "Actually," Amy replied, pulling out some official-looking documents from her bag, "they do when it comes to mailboxes. This particular model was officially recognized in 1965 for its innovative design. Removing it without proper federal authorization would be a violation of Postal Code 436. Mark Thompson took the documents from Amy, scanning them with growing concern. He pulled Karen aside, speaking in hushed but intense tones. The uniformed men shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to proceed. Karen's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "This is just a temporary setback," she announced, trying to maintain her composure. "We'll be filing the necessary paperwork to override any postal service claims." As they retreated to their vehicles, Robert Wilson emerged from his house across the street, followed by several other neighbors who had gathered to watch the confrontation. "We saw everything," Robert called out. "Got it all on video too. My grandson showed me how to use my phone camera last week. Perfect timing, wouldn't you say?" That afternoon, my phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors I hadn't heard from in months. Linda Peterson sent me screenshots of conversations from the neighborhood Facebook group, where Karen was already spinning her version of events. According to her post, I was obstructing community progress and threatening property values with non-standard fixtures. But something unexpected was happening in the comments. People were pushing back. Dave Peterson posted photos of the neighborhood from the 1960s, showing how the diverse architecture and unique features had attracted many homeowners in the first place. Others shared stories of their own battles with the increasingly restrictive HOA guidelines. Steve Cooper, the city council member who had warned me earlier, stopped by again that evening. "Things are shifting," he said, looking more confident than during his last visit. "Karen's overreach is making people nervous. Several council members have received complaints about the HOA's aggressive tactics." The next day, I found an envelope in my mailbox, my actual mailbox, still standing, proudly despite Karen's best efforts. Inside was a business card for Lisa Martinez, a local attorney specializing in property rights and HOA disputes. A handwritten note on the back read, "I've been watching this situation. Call me if you need help. First consultation is free." I scheduled a meeting with Lisa for the following morning. As I was marking it in my calendar, I noticed a group of people gathered near my mailbox. Instead of Karen's usual inspection crew, these were my neighbors, admiring the craftsmanship and taking photos, not to document violations, but to appreciate the artistry. That night, Robert Wilson hosted an impromptu neighborhood meeting in his garage. 15 people showed up, each with their own story about the HOA's increasingly controlling behavior. Jennifer Brooks, the HOA secretary, even made a brief appearance, though she claimed she was just passing by. "You should know," she whispered to me before hurrying off. "Karen's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow night. She's talking about using the HOA's legal fund to make an example of your case." Meeting with Lisa Martinez opened my eyes to the bigger picture behind Karen's crusade against my mailbox. The attorney's office was modest but professional, with framed victories against various HOA overreach cases decorating her walls. "I've been following your situation," Lisa said, spreading out the documents I'd brought. "Your case isn't unique, but it's particularly egregious. I've discovered some concerning patterns in the Oakwood Community Association's recent activities." She pulled up records showing a systematic campaign of property rights violations across several neighborhoods. Karen Mitchell's name appeared repeatedly, moving from one HOA to another, each time implementing increasingly restrictive guidelines. "She's done this before," Lisa explained, showing me newspaper clippings from other communities. "She moves into a neighborhood, gets elected to the HOA board, then starts pushing for standardization. But here's what's interesting. Look who benefits from these changes." The documents revealed a connection between Karen's husband's company and the contractors approved for HOA mandated renovations. The same company that manufactured the approved mailboxes was a subsidiary of Mitchell Development Group. "It's not just about aesthetics," Lisa continued. "It's about control and profit. They create the problem, then sell the solution." As we dug deeper, we uncovered more troubling details. The recent boundary adjustments and bylaw changes hadn't followed proper notification procedures. The board meetings where these changes were approved hadn't met quorum requirements, and most importantly, the HOA's authority to remove private property was legally questionable. "They're counting on homeowners not knowing their rights," Lisa said, "or being too intimidated to fight back." That evening, I received an unexpected visit from Grace Sullivan, the community mediator. She seemed nervous as she sat at my kitchen table. "Tom, I need to tell you something," she said, glancing around as if expecting Karen to materialize. "Last month, I was asked to review some complaints about your property. When I found no valid issues, Karen pressured me to adjust my report. When I refused, I was removed from the committee." Grace pulled out her phone, showing me emails documenting the exchange. "She's been doing this systematically, removing anyone who questions her decisions. Half the board members now are either related to her or have business connections to her husband's company." The next morning, Jennifer Brooks left an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. Inside were minutes from private board meetings, revealing discussions about using HOA funds to pressure non-compliant homeowners into selling. My name appeared on a list titled Phase 1 Acquisitions. Armed with this information, I started connecting with other homeowners who'd faced similar pressure. Linda and Dave Peterson helped me create a private online group where neighbors could share their experiences. Stories poured in: forced renovations, arbitrary fines, selective enforcement of rules. Robert Wilson contributed old photographs and documents showing how the neighborhood had evolved naturally over decades, maintaining its character while accommodating change. These images stood in stark contrast to Karen's vision of cookie-cutter uniformity. Amy Parker, our postal worker, became an unexpected ally in our investigation. Her routes through different neighborhoods helped us track patterns of HOA takeovers. She noticed similar approved fixtures appearing in other communities where Karen had previously served on HOA boards. "It's like watching the same play with different actors," Amy observed. "First come the citations, then the mandatory upgrades, always using the same contractors." Steve Cooper, the city council member, began quietly investigating the approval processes for recent zoning changes. He discovered irregularities in how the HOA's expanded authority had been granted. They rushed these changes through during holiday meetings when most council members were absent, he revealed. "The documentation is full of procedural violations." Lisa Martinez worked to compile all this evidence into a legal strategy. "We're not just fighting about a mailbox anymore," she explained. "We're exposing a pattern of systematic abuse of HOA authority for private gain." The investigation revealed how Karen and her allies had gradually accumulated power, installing friendly board members, changing meeting times to discourage participation, modifying bylaws without proper notice, creating arbitrary standards to force expensive upgrades, using selective enforcement to target specific properties, pressuring appraisers to downgrade non-conforming homes. The first major attack came without warning. I woke up to the sound of power tools at 6 a.m. Racing outside in my pajamas, I found two men in unmarked uniforms attempting to remove my grandfather's mailbox. Karen Mitchell stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching with satisfaction. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward them. "Executing a community safety order," Karen replied smoothly, holding up a document. "You're non-compliant. Fixture has been deemed a hazard requiring immediate removal, but they hadn't counted on my security cameras or my new legal knowledge." I pulled out my phone, already dialing Lisa Martinez's number while recording the scene. "Step away from the mailbox," I demanded. "You have no legal authority to remove private property. My attorney is on speed dial." The workers hesitated, looking to Karen for direction. Her smug expression faltered slightly. "We have proper authorization," she began, but Lisa's voice cut through on speakerphone. "Mrs. Mitchell, This is Lisa Martinez. I strongly advise you to cease and desist immediately. You're currently attempting an illegal property seizure. And yes, my client's cameras are recording everything. By now, neighbors had started emerging from their homes. Robert Wilson was documenting everything on his phone, while Linda Peterson live-streamed the confrontation to our neighborhood Facebook group. Karen's face reddened. "This is a community matter. This is attempted theft," Lisa interrupted. "The police have been notified. I suggest you and your contractors leave immediately." The workers quickly packed up their tools, clearly wanting no part of the escalating situation. As they drove away, Karen jabbed a finger in my direction. "This isn't over, Anderson. Your little rebellion is affecting property values. The board won't stand for it." She stormed off just as police cruisers turned onto our street. Officer Reynolds, who'd grown up in the neighborhood, took statements from multiple witnesses. The security footage clearly showed the attempted removal and Karen's involvement. "We'll file a report," Reynolds assured me. "This could be classified as attempted theft and vandalism." The incident sparked immediate backlash. By noon, our neighborhood message boards were buzzing with outrage. Jennifer Brooks, the HOA secretary, finally broke her silence, sending me an email with attachments. "There was no official board approval for this action," her message read. "Karen acted unilaterally. Here are the real board meeting minutes and the ones she doctored." The documents revealed how Karen had manipulated records, forged signatures, and bypassed proper procedures. She'd even created a fake emergency safety report to justify the removal attempt. That evening, an emergency community meeting convened in Robert's garage. Over 30 neighbors attended, many sharing similar stories of intimidation and unauthorized HOA actions. "She tried to force me to remove my rose garden last month," Mrs. Chen revealed. "Said it wasn't on the approved plant list. They threatened to fine me for my children's swing set," added Mike Rodriguez. "Called it an unauthorized recreational structure." Lisa Martinez attended, explaining our legal options. "This morning's incident gives us grounds for immediate action," she explained. "We can file for an injunction against the HOA board and push for a full audit of their activities." But Karen had one more card to play. The next morning, every house in Maple Grove Estates received a certified letter. The HOA was implementing an emergency special assessment, $2,000 per household for critical community improvements. "It's retaliation," Lisa confirmed. "She's trying to turn the neighborhood against you by hitting their wallets." The strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of blaming me, neighbors began scrutinizing the HOA's financial records. Steve Cooper, using his city council connections, discovered irregularities in the HOA's accounting. "They've been funneling money through shell companies," he revealed, "all connected to Mitchell Development Group." When Amy Parker arrived, with the mail, she had more news. "They're trying this in other neighborhoods too," she reported. "Same tactics, same approved contractors, same overpriced replacements." That afternoon, Karen made her final mistake. She arrived at my house with 2 private security guards, serving a notice that the HOA was placing a lien on my property for accumulated fines and assessments. But we were ready. Lisa had already filed our injunction. The police arrived within minutes, responding to calls from multiple neighbors. This time, Karen's actions were caught on dozens of cameras. Building our defense required a strategic approach. Lisa Martinez moved quickly to establish our legal position, filing emergency motions to protect not just my mailbox, but all homeowners from further HOA overreach. "What we need," Lisa explained during a strategy session at her office, "is a united front. Every piece of evidence, every witness, every documented violation strengthens our case." Robert Wilson had already organized a neighborhood documentation team. Armed with phones and cameras, residents began recording every interaction with HOA board members. Linda Peterson created a secure cloud drive where everyone could upload their evidence, photos, videos, emails, and written accounts of harassment. The key, Lisa emphasized, is showing this isn't just about one mailbox. It's about a systematic abuse of power. Steve Cooper proved invaluable using his city council connections to access public records. He discovered that Karen Mitchell's previous HOA improvements had followed a disturbing pattern. She's been doing this for years, he revealed, spreading documents across Lisa's conference table. Different neighborhoods, same playbook. Force. Expensive upgrades, funnel contracts to approved vendors, pressure homeowners until they sell. In May, Amy Parker, our postal worker, became our eyes and ears across different communities. She started noticing familiar contractors appearing in other neighborhoods where Karen had connections. Same white vans, same approved fixtures, Amy reported. Always just after new HOA guidelines are implemented. Jennifer Brooks, still officially the HOA secretary, became our inside source. Though she couldn't openly support us, she made sure key documents found their way into our hands. Karen's getting nervous, Jennifer whispered during a chance meeting at the grocery store. She's shredding documents and holding closed-door meetings with her husband's business partners. Lisa advised us to play it smart. Document everything, but don't confront directly. Let them make mistakes while we build our case. The community rallied in unexpected ways. Mrs. Chen, a retired photographer, volunteered to take professional photos of every unique feature in the neighborhood, documenting our community's character before any more standardization could occur. Dave Peterson, who worked in IT, set up a secure communication network for residents to share information without HOA interference. They can't monitor what they can't access, he explained. Our breakthrough came when Grace Sullivan, the former community mediator, discovered old architectural surveys in the county archives. These documents proved that many of the original features Karen wanted to remove, including my grandfather's mailbox, were actually protected under historical preservation guidelines. The neighborhood was registered as a historic district in 1975, Grace explained. Any significant changes require review by the Historical Commission. Lisa immediately filed additional motions based on this information. They can't just bulldoze history because it doesn't match their aesthetic, she declared. The support network grew beyond our immediate neighborhood. Other communities facing similar pressures reached out. Lisa began coordinating with attorneys, representing homeowners in nearby developments. We're seeing a pattern of coordinated action, she explained. Multiple HOAs, all connected to Mitchell Development Group, all pushing the same aggressive standardization. Robert Wilson organized weekly strategy meetings in his garage, which became our unofficial headquarters. The walls were covered with maps, timelines, and documentation of HOA violations. "Look at this," he said one evening, pointing to a cluster of pins on a map. Every red pin marks where they've tried to force out long-time residents, always near areas marked for redevelopment by Mitchell's company. Local journalists started sniffing around, attracted by rumors of corruption. Karen's attempts to stonewall only increased their interest. "Your story's just the tip of the iceberg," one reporter told me. "We've found similar cases across 3 counties." Karen Mitchell's full-force attack began on a stormy Wednesday morning. This time, she arrived with not just local contractors, but a full legal team and what appeared to be private security. The show of force was clearly meant to intimidate, but it had the opposite effect. "You have exactly 24 hours to comply with all HOA regulations," she announced, her voice carrying across my front yard. "After that, we'll be forced to take more decisive action." The decisive action came in the form of simultaneous strikes against multiple homeowners. By noon, 5 families had received eviction notices based on alleged HOA violations. The Chen's rose garden was marked for immediate removal. The Rodriguez family's children's playground equipment was tagged for demolition. Even Robert Wilson's historic bird bath was declared non-compliant. But Karen had overplayed her hand. The coordinated attack pushed previously neutral neighbors off the fence. When her security team tried to cordon off the Rodriguez's playground, the entire block showed up to form a human chain. "You want to remove this playground?" Mike Rodriguez challenged. "You'll have to go through all of us first." Local news crews arrived, capturing footage of Karen's security team attempting to intimidate senior citizens and families. The images went viral, Karen screaming at Mrs. Chen as she tended her roses, security guards blocking children from their swing set, contractors attempting to dismantle historical fixtures, while neighbors protested. Lisa Martinez was ready. She filed emergency injunctions against every action, but more importantly, she had prepared a comprehensive legal response that exposed the entire scheme. "Look at these contracts," she presented to the judge. "Every single approved contractor is a subsidiary of Mitchell Development Group. Every forced upgrade channels money directly into their accounts." The financial evidence was damning. Karen's husband's company had created a network of shell corporations that monopolized HOA-mandated improvements. Homeowners were being forced to pay inflated prices for unnecessary upgrades, with the profits flowing back to the Mitchells. Jennifer Brooks finally broke completely with Karen, bringing forth internal documents showing how the scheme worked. And create arbitrary violations. 2. Force expensive upgrades. 3. Channel contracts to controlled companies. 4. Pressure non-compliant homeowners until they sell. 5. Acquire properties at reduced prices. 6. Flip them for profit using their own contractors. "They're not just violating HOA regulations," Lisa explained to the growing crowd of angry homeowners. "This is systematic fraud." The pressure had been building for weeks. Every action Karen took seemed to backfire spectacularly. Her attempt to levy special assessments led to a forensic audit of HOA finances. Her threats of legal action prompted investigations into her husband's business practices. Her security team's intimidation tactics resulted in multiple police reports. Then came the anonymous email. Someone within Mitchell Development Group leaked internal communications detailing the entire operation. The documents showed how they targeted historic neighborhoods, manipulated HOA boards, and profited from forced upgrades. Steve Cooper presented the evidence to the city council. "This isn't just happening in Maple Grove Estates," he revealed. "It's a systematic attempt to take over and commercialize historic neighborhoods across the county." Karen's response was to double down. She called an emergency HOA meeting, attempting to push through even stricter regulations. But this time, the community was ready. Every homeowner showed up, armed with documentation, legal representation, and video cameras. When Karen tried to prevent recording, multiple residents live-streamed the meeting. "This board has lost its legitimacy," Robert Wilson announced, presenting evidence of violated procedures and fraudulent votes. "We demand immediate resignation of all compromised members." The meeting devolved into chaos as Karen lost control. She threatened legal action against every resident, promised to place liens on properties, and even attempted to have security remove protesters. That's when Amy Parker delivered the final blow. She presented official Postal Service documentation showing how Karen's approved mailbox supplier had been price gouging residents at rates 400% above market value. The game-changing discovery came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Brooks arrived at my door late one night, clutching a USB drive and looking terrified. "I was organizing the HOA's digital archives," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "I found something you need to see." The drive contained emails between Karen Mitchell, and her husband's development company dating back 3 years. They detailed an elaborate scheme called Operation Community Standards, a systematic plan to take over historic neighborhoods through HOA manipulation. Lisa Martinez reviewed the documents immediately. "This is the smoking gun," she declared. "They've documented everything. The targeted harassment, the fraudulent violations, even their system for pressuring homeowners to sell." The emails revealed shocking details. Lists of priority acquisition targets, homes they wanted to flip, scripts for HOA meetings to push through regulation changes, price-fixing arrangements with approved contractors, strategies for circumventing historical preservation laws, templates for fabricating safety violations. Most damning was an email from Karen herself. "The mailbox situation is perfect. Once we establish precedent for removing historical fixtures, we can accelerate the neighborhood transformation plan." Steve Cooper took the evidence to his contacts at City Hall. "The council needs to see this," he insisted. "It's not just about property values anymore, it's organized fraud." The next morning, I found Karen and 2 security guards photographing my mailbox again. But this time, I didn't confront them. Instead, I called Lisa. "Let them dig their hole deeper," she advised. "We're ready to spring the trap." That afternoon, Karen called an emergency HOA meeting to push through a community preservation order, essentially giving her board authority to remove any non-compliant fixtures without notice. But when she arrived at the community center, she found more than angry homeowners. The district attorney's office had sent representatives. The state's HOA oversight board was there. Even local news crews waited outside. "Before we begin," Lisa announced, standing up, "I have some documents to share with the board." She projected the emails onto the wall. Karen's face went from confident to ashen as her own words appeared before the assembled crowd. The meeting exploded into chaos. Board members, seeing evidence of their complicity, began turning on each other. Karen tried to shut down the presentation, but Jennifer Brooks, finding her courage, stood up. "As HOA secretary, I certify these documents as authentic," she declared. "They came from our official archives." Robert Wilson then presented his own discovery, a map showing how Karen's previous HOA takeovers aligned perfectly with her husband's development projects. "This isn't about community standards," he announced. "It's about forcing people out of their homes so developers can flip them for profit." Amy Parker added her evidence, documentation showing how the Mitchells' approved contractors had overcharged homeowners by hundreds of thousands of dollars across multiple neighborhoods. Karen tried to maintain control. "These are confidential business documents. This meeting is adjourned." "Actually," Steve Cooper interjected, "according to HOA bylaws, you need a majority vote to adjourn, and I move that we continue." The vote was unanimous, except for Karen and her remaining allies. The showdown happened in the county courthouse on a rainy Thursday morning. Our case against Karen Mitchell and the Oakwood Community Association had finally reached its hearing date. The courtroom was packed, not just with Maple Grove residents, but homeowners from other neighborhoods affected by similar schemes. Lisa Martinez laid out our case methodically, presenting evidence that had grown far beyond a dispute about a single mailbox. On a large screen, she displayed the web of connections between Karen's HOA actions and her husband's development company. "Your Honor," Lisa began, "this case reveals a systematic attempt to manipulate property values and force homeowners out of historic neighborhoods through fraudulent HOA practices. Karen's legal team, led by Mark Thompson, tried to dismiss our evidence as disgruntled homeowner conspiracy theories, but Lisa was prepared. "Let's examine Exhibit A," she announced, pulling up the leaked emails. "Here we have Mrs. Mitchell explicitly discussing using HOA regulations to target specific properties for acquisition. The judge leaned forward as Lisa highlighted key phrases: priority acquisition targets, accelerated compliance measures, forced upgrade protocols. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat as her own words were read aloud. Once we establish precedent with the Anderson mailbox situation, we can implement the full neighborhood transformation plan. These old-timers won't know what hit them. Jennifer Brooks took the stand next, her voice shaking but determined. She detailed how Karen had manipulated HOA records, backdated documents, and created false violation reports. She instructed me to alter meeting minutes, Jennifer testified. Anytime homeowners objected to new regulations, their comments were removed from the record. Steve Cooper presented his findings from the City Council investigation. We discovered systematic violations of zoning laws, historical preservation statutes, and HOA governance regulations. And the evidence kept mounting: fabricated safety reports, inflated contractor invoices, forged board approvals, manipulated property assessments, targeted harassment campaigns. Then Amy Parker delivered her testimony about the mailbox scheme. These approved fixtures weren't just overpriced, she explained. They were deliberately designed to be difficult to maintain, forcing homeowners into expensive service contracts, all with companies controlled by Mitchell Development Group. Karen's facade finally cracked when Lisa presented the financial records. The complex web of shell companies, hidden fees, and kickback schemes was laid bare. Every forced upgrade, every fine, every special assessment had funneled money back to the Mitchells. This isn't about community standards, Lisa concluded. It's about using HOA authority to conduct a massive real estate fraud scheme. The judge's questions were pointed and precise. When Karen took the stand, her usual confidence crumbled under cross-examination. Mrs. Mitchell, Lisa began, can you explain why every approved contractor for HOA-mandated upgrades is a subsidiary of your husband's company? Karen's response was telling. The board approved all vendors through proper channels. And these channels, Lisa pressed, would those be the same channels documented in your emails about controlling the approval process? The final blow came when Robert Wilson presented before and after photos of neighborhoods where Karen's improvement plans had been implemented. Historic homes replaced by cookie-cutter developments. Unique architectural features stripped away, communities robbed of their character. The verdict came down like a thunderbolt. Judge Harrison's voice filled the hushed courtroom as he delivered his ruling, each word measured and decisive. This court finds overwhelming evidence of systematic fraud, abuse of HOA authority, and illegal business practices, he declared. The actions of Karen Mitchell and the current HOA board represent a gross violation of homeowner rights and community trust. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. Immediate dissolution of the current HOA board, all fines and special assessments nullified, full financial restitution to affected homeowners, criminal investigation referral for Karen and her associates, protection order for historic property features, mandatory HOA reform under court supervision. Karen's face turned ashen as the judge continued. Furthermore, this court orders an immediate freeze on all Mitchell Development Group assets, pending investigation of their role in this scheme. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Mrs. Chen hugged her daughter, tears streaming down her face. The Rodriguez family high-fived each other. Robert Wilson simply nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. But the judge wasn't finished. Given the scale of this operation and its impact across multiple communities, I am referring this case to the State Attorney General's office for broader investigation. Karen bolted from the courtroom, pushing past reporters who had gathered outside. Her husband, watching from the back, disappeared just as quickly. Within hours, the story exploded. HOA corruption ring exposed. Historic neighborhood saved from developer scheme. Mailbox battle uncovers multi-million-dollar fraud. The aftermath was swift and far-reaching. The State Attorney General's office launched a task force to investigate similar schemes across the state. Mitchell Development Group's stock plummeted as investors fled. Karen's husband resigned from his company's board. Jennifer Brooks provided prosecutors with additional documents revealing the full scope of the operation. The investigation expanded to include 3 county commissioners, multiple real estate firms, several bank officials, a network of contractors. Lisa Martinez's phone started ringing non-stop with calls from other communities facing similar situations. Your case created a blueprint for fighting back, she told me. People finally realize they don't have to surrender to HOA tyranny. Steve Cooper led the effort to reform local HOA regulations. We're implementing safeguards to prevent this from happening again. No more secret meetings, no more arbitrary rules, no more conflicts of interest. The most satisfying moment came when the new interim HOA board held its first meeting. The agenda's first item, cataloging and protecting historic neighborhood. Features starting with my grandfather's mailbox. Amy Parker brought a special delivery that day, official historical designation papers for the mailbox. This ensures it'll be here for future generations, she said, running her hand over the worn copper surface. Some things are worth preserving. Robert Wilson organized a neighborhood celebration in his backyard. Residents brought photos and stories of their homes' histories, sharing memories of what made our community special. Mrs. Chen's roses bloomed freely again. The Rodriguez kids' laughter rang out from their playground. Historic fixtures emerged from behind generic covers, restored to their former glory. 1 year later, Maple Grove Estates had transformed back into the vibrant, diverse community it was always meant to be. The legacy of our fight against HOA corruption became a blueprint for neighborhood resistance across the country. The new HOA board, democratically elected and transparently operated, focused on preserving our community's character rather than enforcing uniformity. Regular meetings were now live-streamed, with full documentation available to all residents. My grandfather's mailbox stood proudly at the center of these changes, now officially registered as a historic landmark. The County Historical Society even added it to their preservation tour, using it as an example of mid-century craftsmanship worth protecting. The most significant change came in how neighbors interacted. The walls of suspicion Karen had built came down. Mrs. Chen started a community garden club, teaching others how to grow the roses she'd nearly lost. The Rodriguez family hosted weekly playground meetups, their once threatened play area now a gathering spot for neighborhood children. Robert Wilson turned his garage into a community history center, displaying photos and artifacts from the neighborhood's past. We forget sometimes, he'd tell visitors, that these old houses and fixtures aren't just things, they're our community's story. Lisa Martinez used our case to help draft new state legislation protecting homeowner rights. The Maple Grove Act established strict guidelines for HOA governance and created an oversight board to prevent future abuse. As for Karen Mitchell, the aftermath of her scheme's exposure was severe. The criminal investigation uncovered even more widespread corruption than we'd initially discovered. She and her husband faced multiple federal charges for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. Mitchell Development Group's collapse triggered a statewide audit of development projects, exposing similar schemes in other communities. The investigation led to reform of HOA regulations, stricter oversight of development contracts, protection for historic properties, new transparency requirements, anti-retaliation measures for homeowners. Jennifer Brooks found her voice as an advocate for HOA reform, testifying before state legislators about the importance of protecting community character. What happened in Maple Grove wasn't unique, she explained, but how we fought back can be a model for others. Amy Parker still delivers our mail, taking special pride in my grandfather's mailbox. Every morning when I put letters in this box, she told me, I remember what we fought for. The solidarity we built during our struggle had lasting effects. Neighbors looked out for each other in new ways. When the Chens needed help restoring their garden after a storm, the whole street turned out. When the Rodriguez kids organized a lemonade stand fundraiser for new playground equipment, they raised 3 times their goal. Steve Cooper used our experience to create a community preservation committee, ensuring future development would respect our neighborhood's historic character. We learned that progress doesn't mean erasing the past, he said. It means building on its foundation. One sunny morning, almost exactly a year after the court verdict, I found a letter in my grandfather's mailbox. It was from a community preservation group in another state, asking for advice on fighting their own HOA battle. Your story gave us hope, they wrote. Can you tell us how you did it? Looking at my grandfather's mailbox catching the morning light, just as it had for over 60 years, I knew exactly what to tell them. Stand firm, build community, and never let anyone tell you that uniformity is more important than character. Today, Maple Grove Estates serves as a template for how neighborhoods can maintain their unique identity while still evolving. Our story proves that when communities unite against corruption, justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to check out the next 2 videos on your screen. Like and subscribe to join our community of homeowners fighting for their rights. Share your own stories in the comments below. Remember, whether it's a mailbox, a garden, or a playground, some things are worth fighting for, because in the end, it's not just about property. It's about preserving the soul of our communities for generations to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.